My name is Celeste Harmon. I'm 31 years old. And the December my mother called to tell me Christmas dinner was immediate family only this year was when I finally understood that invisibility and irrelevance are not the same thing. She made that call on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table going through a folder of property maintenance receipts I'd been meaning to file. The call lasted 4 minutes. Her voice was pleasant, even, the particular pleasantness she used when she had already decided something and was notifying rather than discussing. She said the holidays were going to be low-key. She said my Aunt Renata was having a hard year and needed a quieter gathering. She said she hoped I understood. I said I did. I said to tell everyone hello. Then I set the phone down on top of the folder and looked at the window for a while. What my mother did not know, what she had not thought to check, or had thought to check and decided wasn't her concern, was that the folder I had been sorting through when she called contained 6 years of documents related to a property she was, at that exact moment, 3 days away from listing with a realtor named Stephen Cook. I did not call her back that night. My grandmother's name was Iris. She was the kind of woman who kept her important papers in a fireproof lockbox under her bed and her checkbook balanced to the penny, and who had, in her late 70s, the clear-eyed practicality of someone who had watched what happened to families when no one made the necessary arrangements in time. She had one daughter, my mother, Margaret, and one granddaughter, which was me. She had also, for as long as I could remember, a relationship with my mother that was warm in the way of people who love each other and have learned, over decades, which subjects to leave alone. My grandmother owned a house in a quiet residential neighborhood 2 towns over from where I grew up. She had lived there for 41 years. The house was not large, 3 bedrooms, a sun porch, a kitchen with a window over the sink that caught the afternoon light in a way she'd mentioned, probably 100 times across my childhood, was the reason she bought the place. The neighborhood had changed around it in the way that neighborhoods change, some houses larger, some streets busier. The corner lot down the block converted to a small commercial space, but her street had stayed mostly the same. Her neighbors on both sides had been there almost as long as she had. When my grandmother was 79, she had a fall. Not a serious one. She caught herself on the kitchen counter, bruised her hip, was more shaken than hurt, but it was the kind of fall that changes the conversation. My mother drove up the following weekend, and they talked about what came next. My grandmother had strong opinions about what came next, which was that she intended to remain in her house for as long as she was able and that she wanted the relevant paperwork in order before any of her abilities became a question. She had an attorney she trusted. His name was Franklin Adeyemi, and he had handled her affairs for the previous decade, her late husband's estate, a small property dispute in the late 90s, the revisions to her will after my grandfather passed. She contacted him, and they began working through what she wanted. What she wanted, it turned out, was a revocable living trust. She wanted the house and her remaining liquid assets placed into it, managed according to her instructions, and overseen by a trustee she named herself. She named me. I was 25 at the time. I had a degree in accounting, a job at a regional firm where I had been working for 2 years, and a relationship with my grandmother that had always been, in some ways I could not have explained precisely, more direct than the one she had with my mother. We talked about practical things. We talked about money without embarrassment. When she needed someone to sit with her at the doctor's office and actually listen to what was being said, she called me. She told me what she was planning before the documents were finalized. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she had taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12, and she laid it out clearly. The trust would hold the house. I would be the trustee. My mother would be the primary beneficiary upon her death, meaning the house would pass to her at that point, but until then, any decisions about the property, maintenance, rental, sale, required my authorization as trustee. Your mother is not good with paperwork, she said. This was the entirety of her explanation, and it was, in its compression, completely accurate. The documents were executed in the spring of that year. Franklin Adeyemi filed them with the county recorder's office. The trust instrument was public record from that point forward. I told my mother the trust existed. I told her in general terms that Grandma had set up a living trust with an attorney, that it covered the house, that everything was organized. My mother nodded and said that sounded like something her mother would do. She did not ask for details. She did not ask who the trustee was. I did not offer that information. My grandmother had not asked me to, and I understood, in the way you understand things you don't discuss out loud, that the knowledge would create a conversation my grandmother did not want to have. For 6 years, being the trustee was mostly quiet work. My grandmother remained in the house until she was 83, by which point her mobility had declined enough that the stairs were a genuine risk. The conversation about moving to an assisted living facility was one she had already made peace with before it happened. She was a woman who did her grieving in advance, which I had always found both admirable and a little heartbreaking. She moved in September. I helped her pack, which meant mostly sitting with her while she decided what to keep and what to let go, and driving 4 carloads of her things to the facility, where she would spend the next 2 years. The house did not sell immediately. My grandmother, still the trust's grantor and living beneficiary, did not want it sold. She wanted it held. She had a specific and sentimental attachment to the idea that it still existed, unchanged, on that street with the afternoon light through the kitchen window. I respected that. My job was to manage the property according to her wishes, not my own. So, I managed it. I arranged for a neighbor, a retired man named Gerald who had lived across the street for 20 years and who did occasional handyman work in the area, to check on the house weekly and handle minor maintenance. I paid him from a property maintenance account I administered through the trust. I handled the homeowner's insurance renewals, the property tax filings, the furnace inspection each October, the gutter cleaning each spring. I drove out every 6 weeks or so to walk through the rooms and note anything that needed attention. I kept records of everything. This was not a burden, it was simply how I worked. Receipts, dates, invoices, payment confirmations. A running maintenance log in a binder I kept in my home office. 6 years of that binder, organized by year, each year tabbed and indexed. The annual costs ran to approximately $9,200, insurance, taxes, Gerald's fees, maintenance items. I paid most of this myself from my own income and tracked it as a formal loan to the trust that would be reconciled when the property eventually sold. My grandmother knew this. Franklin Adeyemi knew this. It was documented. My mother did not know this. She knew the house existed and that her mother had set up a trust. She did not know the maintenance costs, the administrative structure, or my role in it. She had, in 6 years, never asked. My grandmother died in October, 14 months before the December that begins the story. She was 85. She had been, in her final weeks, very peaceful. The word her primary care nurse used was settled, which I thought was the right word. She had done what she wanted to do. She was ready. The death of a parent is its own kind of reorganization, even when it is expected. My mother and I were both present in the days immediately after, and there was a functional tenderness between us then, the tenderness of shared grief, which is different from closeness, but can feel like it in the moment. The practical matters took some time to sort through. Franklin Adeyemi was still her attorney and walked my mother through the estate process. The trust, he explained, was now operative. My grandmother's death had triggered the distribution provisions. The house would pass to my mother as the beneficiary, at which point it would exit the trust and become her property outright. However, that transfer required a formal trustee action, and I was the trustee. I had a conversation with Franklin about timing. He advised that there was no legal rush. The trust could hold the property for a reasonable period during which I, as trustee, could wind down the administrative obligations in an orderly way. He filed the necessary notifications with the county recorder. He sent my mother a letter explaining the process in straightforward terms. My mother called me after she received the letter. The call was brief. She said she understood the house was going through some legal process and that Franklin had explained it. She said she supposed she'd eventually need to think about what to do with it. I said that was right and that when she was ready to discuss it, we should talk through the options together. She said, of course. She said, absolutely. That was in November, 11 months before the December Christmas call. In the months that followed, I continued managing the property. The trust was still technically the title holder until I executed the formal transfer document, which required my signature as trustee and coordination with Franklin's office. I had begun drafting the paperwork. I was not moving slowly out of any strategic purpose. I was simply managing a full caseload at work and handling the trust wind down with the same methodical pace I'd applied to everything else. In September, my mother called and mentioned, in a way that was adjacent to casual, that she had spoken to a real estate person about the general market in the neighborhood. She said property values had done well. She said she was just getting a sense of things. I said that made sense, and that we should talk before she made any decisions, because the trust transfer hadn't been completed yet. She said she understood. She did not call again about it. On the Tuesday before the December call, I had looked up the property address online, a routine check I did every few months to confirm nothing unusual had been filed, and found nothing. No active listing. No new filings. On Thursday, she called about Christmas. On Sunday evening, 3 days later, I was doing the same routine check, and the property appeared on a residential listing aggregator. Listed at $340,000. 3 photos already uploaded: the front exterior, the living room, the kitchen with the afternoon window light. A realtor named Stephen Cook, from a local brokerage, listed as the agent. Contact information for showings. I sat with that for a moment. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the trust document. The trust was still the title holder of record. My name was still the trustee of record. Nothing had changed on the county recorder's side since Franklin's notifications in November. The title was not clear for sale. My mother had no legal authority to list the property, except an offer or authorize a closing. Stephen Cook had listed a house he had not verified the ownership of. I closed the laptop. I made a cup of tea. I stood at the counter while it steeped and thought about what I wanted to do and in what order. I did not call my mother. I did not call Stephen Cook. I did not call Franklin that night. I drank my tea. I went to bed. Monday morning, I called Franklin Adeyemi at 8:45. I described what I had found. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in the measured way of someone who has seen many variations of this particular situation, "All right. Let me send a letter to the listing brokerage." He sent it that afternoon. It was addressed to the broker of record at Stephen Cook's firm and copied to Stephen Cook directly. It identified the trust as the title holder of record, identified me as the sole trustee, noted that no trustee authorization for the listing had been given or sought, and requested that the listing be suspended pending clarification of the ownership situation. He sent a courtesy copy to the title company whose name appeared in the listing's fine print. Stephen Cook called me at 4:17 that afternoon. He was careful in his phrasing, professionally so, the kind of careful that means someone has just spoken to their broker and possibly their firm's legal contact. He said he had received correspondence from an attorney indicating there might be a question about the ownership of the property he was currently representing. "There's no question," I told him. "The property is held in trust. I'm the trustee. My mother is the beneficiary, but the beneficial interest and the title authority are not the same thing. She can't list it without my authorization as trustee, and I haven't given that authorization." A pause. "I wasn't aware of a trust structure." "The trust has been on file with the county recorder since 2019, I said. "It's public record." Another pause. "I see. I'll need to speak with my clients." "That sounds right," I said. He suspended the listing that evening. The 3 photos and the $340,000 price disappeared from the aggregator before 9 o'clock. My mother called me at 8:52 the following morning. I knew she would call. I had thought about how I wanted to handle it while I was making breakfast, while I was driving to work, while I was sitting at my desk before my first meeting. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 9:14. And at 9:41. At 10:03, she left a voicemail. Her voice on the message was controlled but tight at the edges, the particular tightness that comes when someone is working hard to sound reasonable. She said there had been some confusion with the realtor. She said she thought the trust matter had been resolved. She said she needed to talk. I called her back at 11:30 between meetings. She started with the confusion framing, said she'd understood from the paperwork Franklin sent that the house was being transferred to her, that she had thought the process was further along than it was, that she hadn't realized the trust was still technically in place. I let her finish. Then I said, "The transfer document hasn't been executed yet. The trust is still the title holder. I'm still the trustee." "I didn't know you had to sign something." Franklin's letter in November explained the process, I said. A held breath on the line. I didn't read it carefully. I know, I said. Not unkindly. Simply as a fact. The buyers, she started. Stephen said there was a couple who'd already done a walkthrough. The listing was unauthorized, I said. Stephen couldn't have legally closed that sale. The title company would have caught it at closing if nothing else. But the listing shouldn't have gone up in the first place. Another breath. Celeste, I need to sell that house. I've been thinking about it for months. It's sitting there. It costs money to maintain. I've been paying the maintenance costs, I said, for 6 years. From my own account. She did not say anything for a moment. I have the receipts, I said. I have every invoice, every payment confirmation, every tax filing. 43 months of property tax, 6 years of insurance, Gerald's fees. It's all documented. When we formally wind down the trust, those amounts will be reconciled from the sale proceeds. The silence on the line had a different quality now. You never told me, she said. I told you the trust was managing the property, I said. The details were mine to handle. That's what a trustee does, she said after a moment. Why didn't you tell me it was you when she set it up? I had thought about this question. I had thought about it for 6 years in a background way, the way you think about things you know will eventually surface. Because Grandma didn't ask me to, I said. And because you didn't ask. The silence after that was the longest one. I waited through it. I excluded you from Christmas, she said. It wasn't an apology. It was more like a woman looking at a map she'd been reading incorrectly and noting, out loud, the error. You did, I said. Because Renata, she stopped. It wasn't only because of Renata. I didn't respond to that. What happens now, she said. I'll complete the trustee transfer, I said. The house becomes yours. At that point, you can do whatever you'd like with it. List it with whoever you want. I would ask that we settle the maintenance cost reconciliation through Franklin before closing, so it comes out of the proceeds cleanly. How much is it? I'll have Franklin's office prepare the accounting, I said. It's in the documentation. It won't be a surprise. She said, all right. She said she supposed that was fair. Then she said, in a voice that was quieter than the rest of the call had been, your grandmother trusted you with something important. Yes, I said. She did. We said goodbye. The formal trust transfer took 6 weeks from that call. Franklin Adeyemi prepared the trustee's deed, the document by which I, as trustee, formally conveyed the property to my mother as the now outright owner. I reviewed it, signed it, had it notarized, and returned it to Franklin's office. He filed it with the county recorder. The house was hers. The maintenance cost reconciliation came to $54,600 across the 6 years. Taxes, insurance, Gerald's fees, 2 furnace repairs, a water heater replacement, and the accumulated small maintenance items Gerald had handled. Franklin presented it formally as part of the trust wind-down accounting. My mother reviewed it with her own accountant, a woman named Patricia Soule, who confirmed the documentation was thorough and the amounts appropriate. My mother did not dispute a single line item. The house listed in March, with a different agent, a woman named Dana Breck, who worked out of a brokerage my mother found independently. The listing price was $347,000, reflecting the market shift in the intervening months. It sold in 22 days, at $351,500, to a couple who had been looking in the neighborhood for the better part of a year. The maintenance reconciliation came out of the proceeds at closing. What remained went to my mother. I drove past the house on the day the sale closed. It was a Thursday in late April, and the afternoon light was coming through the front windows in the way it always had. The new owners hadn't moved in yet. The house looked the same as it always had. The sun porch, the front beds that Gerald had kept edged and tidy, the driveway where my grandmother's car had sat for 40 years until she couldn't drive anymore. I did not stop. I drove past and kept going. My mother and I had dinner together in February between the transfer and the listing. It was her suggestion which surprised me, and her choice of restaurant, a place downtown she'd been going to for years that I had always liked. We talked about practical things at first. The transfer timeline, Dana Breck's preliminary assessment of the market, what my mother planned to do with the proceeds. Then, over coffee, she said something I had not expected. She said she had gone back and read Franklin's November letter. The full letter. The one she had skimmed when it arrived. She said she had understood, reading it carefully, how much work I had done. She said she hadn't known what a trustee actually did, day to day, and that she was sorry she hadn't asked. I accepted that. Not effusively, and not as the resolution of everything. There were things between us that had nothing to do with the trust and would take longer than a dinner to untangle, if they untangled at all. But I accepted it as what it was, a woman reading a map correctly, finally, and saying so. She did not mention Christmas. I did not bring it up. There is a particular kind of competence that goes unnoticed because it does not call attention to itself. It does not announce what it has done. It does not wait to be thanked. It shows up, it does the work, it keeps the receipts, and it trusts that the record will eventually speak on its own behalf. My grandmother understood this. She had lived by it for 85 years. She passed a house in trust to the person she knew would keep it exactly right. Not the person who would have noticed the listing on a residential aggregator, not the person who would have called Stephen Cook without thinking through the sequence, but the one who would make a cup of tea and wait until morning. The work you do quietly is still work. The record you keep carefully is still a record. The document filed in 2019 was public. It was always public. It simply waited for someone to pull it. If you've ever been the one who kept something running in the background, paid the bills, filed the paperwork, showed up without being asked, and then had someone act as though that thing ran itself, I want to know about the moment it became visible. Was it at a table with an attorney? Was it a phone call you let go to voicemail? Was it a document someone finally read all the way through? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. New stories every week. All of them about people who were underestimated, and records that told the truth. I'm Celeste. Thank you for being here.